The voicemail started playing at 11:47 p.m., and by the time it ended 2 minutes later, my entire world had shattered into pieces I didn't know how to put back together. My daughter Emma's voice, small and broken, whispered through the speaker, "Daddy, Mommy says you don't love us anymore. She says that's why you're never home. Is it true?" The message had been sent 3 hours earlier while I was in a budget meeting downtown, my phone on silent. 3 hours my 7-year-old had been carrying that lie in her heart. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 3 hours my ex-wife Christine had to poison my children against me. But what Christine didn't know was that our son, Marcus, 9 years old and smarter than anyone gave him credit for, had recorded the entire conversation on his tablet. Every word. Every manipulation. Every calculated lie she'd fed them about their father. I sat in my car outside my apartment, hands shaking as I listened to the recording Marcus had just sent me. And in that moment, I knew the custody battle I'd been losing for 6 months was about to take a very different turn. My name is James Morgan, and for 33 years I believed that hard work and honesty were enough to build a good life. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, where my father taught me that a man's word was his bond and that family came before everything else. I carried those values into my marriage, into my career as a civil engineer, and into every decision I made as a father. For 8 years, I thought Christine and I were building something solid. We had 2 beautiful children, a modest house in Tempe with a backyard where the kids could play, and what I believed was a partnership based on mutual respect and shared dreams. I worked long hours designing infrastructure projects that would serve our community for decades. The pay was decent, not extravagant, but enough to provide stability. Christine stayed home with the kids when they were young, then started working part-time at a marketing firm once Emma started school. From the outside, we looked like any other middle-class family navigating the beautiful chaos of raising children. But somewhere along the way, the foundation I thought we'd built together started cracking. Christine grew distant, her complaints about money becoming more frequent and more bitter. She wanted a bigger house, newer cars, vacations to places I couldn't pronounce. She started comparing our life to her friends' lives, measuring our worth in square footage and brand names. I tried to explain that we were saving for the kids' college funds, that my job provided excellent benefits and a solid retirement plan, that security mattered more than status. She heard it as excuses. She heard it as failure. The arguments became routine, her voice rising as mine grew quieter, trying not to let the children hear us falling apart. I suggested counseling. She said counseling was for people who had already given up. I suggested we sit down and make a financial plan together. She said I'd never understand what she needed. The gap between us widened into a chasm I couldn't bridge, no matter how many times I reached across it. Then one Tuesday evening in March, I came home to find her suitcases packed and standing by the front door. Marcus and Emma sat on the couch, confusion and fear written across their small faces. Christine's lawyer had already filed the paperwork. She wanted the house. She wanted primary custody. She wanted child support calculated at a rate that would leave me with barely enough to rent a decent apartment. And she got it, at least initially, because family courts in Arizona tend to favor mothers, especially when those mothers paint themselves as the stable, present parent while depicting fathers as distant workaholics who chose their careers over their families. The narrative she spun was simple and devastatingly effective. I was never home. I prioritized work over family time. The children barely knew me because I was always at the office or on construction sites. She conveniently left out the fact that she'd encouraged me to take on extra projects to fund the lifestyle upgrades she constantly demanded. She forgot to mention that when I did come home early to surprise the kids, she'd often scheduled activities without telling me, then acted hurt that I hadn't known about them. The temporary custody arrangement gave her weekdays and alternating weekends. I got every other Saturday and Sunday, a few holidays, and Wednesday evenings for dinner. 48 hours every 2 weeks to be a father to my children. 90 minutes on Wednesday nights to squeeze in homework help, conversations about their day, and all the love I could possibly compress into such a brief window. It felt like trying to build a relationship through a keyhole. Marcus handled it with a stoic silence that worried me more than tears would have. He stopped talking about school, stopped sharing his drawings, stopped asking me to play basketball in the driveway of my cramped apartment. Emma, younger and less guarded, cried every time I dropped her back at the house that used to be mine. She'd wrap her arms around my neck and whisper, "Why can't you come inside, Daddy?" And I'd have to explain again that this was how things were now, that Mommy and Daddy living apart didn't mean I loved her any less, even as my heart fractured a little more with each goodbye. Christine moved on quickly. Too quickly. Within 3 months, she was posting photos on social media with Derek Sullivan, a real estate developer with silver hair, expensive watches, and the kind of smile that sold people things they didn't need. He drove a Mercedes, wore tailored suits even on weekends, and had the sort of easy confidence that comes from never having worried about money. I tried not to look at the pictures, tried not to see my children in the background of photos taken at restaurants I couldn't afford, standing in front of Derek's lakeside cabin, riding in his boat. But Marcus sent me a message one night that made my blood run cold. "Mom says Derek is going to be our new dad." I called immediately, heart pounding, but Christine didn't answer. I texted, asking if we could talk about what Marcus had told me. Her response came 2 hours later: "The kids need stability and a present father figure. If you can't provide that, someone else will." The custody hearing was scheduled for late September, 6 months after the separation. My lawyer, Patricia Chen, was honest with me from the start. "Family courts prioritize stability and the primary caregiver," she said during our first meeting. "Christine has been home with the kids more. She has the house. She has a new partner who can provide financial security. Unless we can prove she's unfit or that you can offer something significantly better for the children's well-being, the judge will likely make the temporary arrangement permanent." I asked what would constitute proof of unfitness. Patricia's expression was sympathetic but firm. "Abuse, neglect, substance problems, or evidence of parental alienation." But parental alienation is extremely difficult to prove. You'd need clear documentation of her actively working to damage your relationship with the children. I threw myself into being the best father I could be in the limited time I had. Every other weekend became sacred. I took the kids to the science museum, taught Marcus how to use my old drafting tools, let Emma help me cook pancakes that never quite turned out right. We played board games and watched movies and built elaborate pillow forts in my tiny living room. I made sure they knew, without question, that they were loved and wanted. But I could feel them pulling away despite my best efforts. Marcus stopped making eye contact as much. Emma started mentioning things Derek had bought them, said with the innocent cruelty of a child who doesn't understand the knife she's twisting. "Derek took us to Disneyland," she'd say. "Derek bought Marcus a new bike." Each statement was a reminder of what I couldn't provide, of how I was being measured against someone with deeper pockets and found wanting. Wednesday dinners became increasingly strained. I'd pick them up from Christine's house, and she'd stand in the doorway with Derek beside her, watching as the kids climbed into my aging Honda Civic. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. My car had a dent in the passenger door from a parking lot incident I couldn't afford to fix. Derek's Mercedes gleamed in the driveway behind them, perfect and untouchable. Sometimes Christine would call as I was driving away, suddenly remembering that Emma had a school project due the next day and needed to come back early, cutting our already brief time even shorter. Other times, Marcus would be distant and monosyllabic, answering my questions with shrugs and single words. I tried to reach him, tried to understand what was happening inside his head, but he'd built walls I couldn't scale. Then came the night everything changed. It was a Wednesday in mid-August, oppressively hot even after sunset, the kind of Arizona heat that makes the air shimmer and your shirt stick to your back. I'd had a particularly brutal day at work, a project had fallen behind schedule due to permit issues, and I'd spent hours in meetings trying to solve problems that felt insurmountable. I picked up the kids at 6, and the moment they climbed into the car, I knew something was wrong. Emma's eyes were red from crying. Marcus stared out the window, jaw clenched in a way that reminded me painfully of myself. I asked what was wrong. Emma shook her head. Marcus said nothing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We drove to the diner we usually went to, a family-owned place with good burgers and a jukebox that still played actual records. The kids picked at their food, barely eating. I tried to make conversation, asking about school starting soon, about their summer, about anything that might get them to open up. Nothing worked. Finally, as I was driving them back, Emma started crying again. Not the dramatic tears of a child throwing a tantrum, but quiet, hopeless sobs that made my chest ache. I pulled into a parking lot, turned around in my seat, and asked her what was wrong. She looked at Marcus, as if seeking permission. He stared at his hands, then finally spoke. "Mom says you don't really want us," he said, his voice flat and careful. "She says you only spend time with us because the court makes you. She says if you really loved us, you'd fight harder to be with us more." The words hit me like a physical blow. I struggled to breathe for a moment, anger and heartbreak warring inside me. I chose my words carefully, keeping my voice steady even as everything in me wanted to scream. "That's not true," I said. "None of that is true. I love you both more than anything in this world. I'm fighting as hard as I possibly can. The reason I can't see you more right now is because of court rules, not because I don't want to." Emma wiped her nose on her sleeve. "But Mom said you work all the time because you don't want to be around us. She said that's why you and her aren't together anymore." I felt my hands tightening on the steering wheel, knuckles going white. This was parental alienation, exactly what Patricia had said I'd need to prove. But how could I prove it? It was my word against Christine's, and she'd made sure to say these things when no one else was listening. I couldn't call my children liars. I couldn't put them in the middle more than they already were. I took a deep breath and tried to explain in terms they could understand. Sometimes when grown-ups split up, they remember things differently. Your mom and I have disagreements about what happened, but that doesn't change how much I love you. Nothing she says and nothing that happens will ever change that. Marcus looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes. Doubt, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. But he didn't say anything else. I dropped them off 10 minutes later, watching as they walked up to the door where Christine waited. She smiled at them, warm and maternal, then glanced at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Triumph, maybe. Or challenge. I drove back to my apartment in a fog, my mind racing. I needed proof. I needed something concrete that showed what she was doing. But how could I get it without putting the kids in an impossible position? I spent the rest of the evening pacing my small living room, researching parental alienation, reading case studies and legal precedents. Most cases went nowhere because the evidence was too subjective, too dependent on testimony from children who were naturally loyal to both parents. I needed something irrefutable. The breakthrough came 2 weeks later, though I didn't know it at the time. I was working late on a Thursday, finalizing designs for a new bridge project, when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was 11:47 p.m. A voicemail from Emma's number, which was actually Christine's old phone that Emma used for emergencies. I almost didn't listen to it, assuming it was a pocket dial or a mistake. But something made me put down my drafting pencil and press play. Emma's voice filled the quiet of my office, small and frightened and utterly heartbroken. "Daddy, it's me. I'm sorry to call so late. Mommy says you don't love us anymore. She says that's why you're never home. She says you told her you wished you didn't have kids because we make your life harder. Is it true? Did you really say that? Marcus says it's not true, but I don't know what to believe. I miss you, Daddy. Please tell me it's not true." The message ended. I sat frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear, as rage and anguish flooded through me in equal measure. I had never said those words. I had never even thought them. Every single syllable was a fabrication, a poison fed to my daughter by the woman who was supposed to protect her. I looked at the timestamp on the voicemail. It had been sent over 3 hours ago while I was in a budget meeting with my phone on silent. For 3 hours, my 7-year-old daughter had been carrying that lie in her heart, believing that her father didn't want her. I immediately called Christine's number. No answer. I called again. Nothing. I sent a text, "We need to talk right now. This is not okay." The message showed as read, but she didn't respond. I sat there in my office, the city lights of Phoenix stretching out beyond my window, and tried to figure out what to do. I could call Patricia in the morning, tell her about the voicemail, but would it be enough? Christine would just deny saying it, or claim that Emma had misunderstood, or somehow twist it to make me the problem. I needed more. I needed something that couldn't be explained away. Then my phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Marcus's number. The message was simple: "Dad, I recorded what Mom said tonight. All of it. I'm sending you the file." A moment later, an audio file appeared in our chat thread. My hands shook as I downloaded it and pressed play. The recording was rough, the audio quality poor because it had obviously been captured secretly on Marcus's tablet from somewhere in the house. But the voices were clear enough. Christine's voice, angry and bitter, cutting through whatever small noises Marcus had made while hiding. "Your father doesn't love you the way I do. If he did, he'd be here. He'd fight to see you more. But he's too busy with his little projects, building bridges for strangers while his own children need him. You know what he told me once? He said having kids ruined his career. He said if he could do it over, he'd choose differently." Emma's voice, crying, "That's not true. Daddy wouldn't say that." Christine's voice, softer now, more manipulative, "I know it hurts, baby. But you need to understand who he really is. When the judge asks you who you want to live with, you need to tell the truth. You need to say you want to stay with me and Derek, where people actually care about you." The recording continued for another minute, Christine layering lie upon lie, building a narrative designed to turn my children against me while positioning herself and Derek as the only stable, loving option. Then Marcus's voice, steady and brave in a way that made my throat tighten, "You're lying. Dad never said that. You're making it up." Christine's response was sharp, "Don't you dare call me a liar, young man. Go to your room. And give me that tablet." There was the sound of movement, a door slamming, then silence. Marcus must have stopped the recording and hidden the tablet before she could confiscate it. My 9-year-old son had risked his mother's anger to capture the truth. He'd seen through her manipulation and had the courage to document it. I listened to the recording 3 more times, making sure I understood every word, every nuance. This was it. This was the irrefutable evidence Patricia had said I'd need. Christine had been caught, in her own words, actively working to destroy my relationship with my children. Parental alienation, captured in digital clarity. I saved the file to 3 different locations, backed it up to the cloud, and emailed a copy to myself. Then I sent Marcus a message, "I got it. Thank you for being brave. I love you so much." None of what she said is true. Not one word. His response came immediately, "I know, Dad." I never believed her. Emma's upset, but I told her it was all lies. "We miss you." I stared at that message for a long time, pride and heartbreak mixing in my chest. My children were caught in the middle of a war they hadn't asked for, and yet Marcus had chosen to be a truth-teller at an age when most kids just wanted to play video games and avoid conflict. The next morning, I called Patricia before sunrise. She answered groggily, but when I explained what I had, her tone sharpened with professional focus. "Send me the file immediately," she said. "This changes everything. If Christine is coaching the children to lie in court and actively undermining your relationship, we can petition for an emergency custody evaluation. This is serious, James. This is exactly what we needed." I sent her the recording and the voicemail from Emma, then sat in my apartment as the sun rose over the desert, feeling something I hadn't felt in months, hope. Not the naive hope of someone who doesn't understand how the world works, but the hard-earned hope of a man who finally has the ammunition to fight back. Patricia filed an emergency motion that afternoon, requesting an immediate custody evaluation and asking the judge to review evidence of parental alienation. Christine's lawyer responded with predictable outrage, claiming the recording had been obtained illegally, that Marcus had been coached by me to create false evidence, that I was the one actually engaging in alienation by turning the children against their mother. But Arizona is a one-party consent state, meaning Marcus had every legal right to record conversations he was part of. And the voicemail from Emma, sent from Christine's own phone, corroborated everything Marcus had captured. The judge scheduled an emergency hearing for the following week. Those 7 days felt like 7 years. I continued my normal routine, going to work, picking up the kids for our Wednesday dinner, acting as if everything was fine. But Marcus and I exchanged knowing glances, a silent understanding between us. Emma was quieter than usual, still processing everything she'd heard and been told. I didn't press her, didn't try to counterprogram what Christine had said. I just loved her, consistent and patient, trusting that truth would eventually cut through the lies. On Wednesday night, as I was dropping them off, Christine came out to the car instead of waiting at the door. She leaned down to my window, her smile tight and false. "I hear you're making a fuss in court," she said. "I don't know what you think you're accomplishing, but the judge isn't going to take children away from their mother based on some misunderstanding." I looked at her, really looked at her, and wondered when she'd become someone I didn't recognize. "It's not a misunderstanding," I said quietly. "It's the truth. And the truth has a way of coming out." Her smile faltered for just a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. Then she straightened, turned on her heel, and walked back into the house with the children. I drove away knowing that the next time I saw her would be in a courtroom, with a judge listening to her own words condemning her. The hearing was held on a Wednesday morning in a small courtroom that smelled of old wood and tension. Christine sat with her lawyer on one side, Derek beside her in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I sat with Patricia on the other side, my only suit pressed and ready, a folder of evidence on the table between us. The judge, a woman in her 50s named Judge Martinez, reviewed the filings with an expression that gave nothing away. She looked up and addressed both lawyers. "I've read the motions and the evidence submitted. I want to be clear that this court takes allegations of parental alienation extremely seriously. Ms. Chen, you may present your case." Patricia stood and walked the judge through everything, the timeline of increasing distance between me and the children, the sudden change in their behavior, the voicemail from Emma, and finally, the recording Marcus had made. She played the audio file in the courtroom, and I watched Christine's face go pale as her own voice filled the space. Every lie, every manipulation, every word designed to poison my children against me, laid bare for the judge to hear. When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. Judge Martinez looked at Christine, then at her lawyer. "Does your client wish to respond to this evidence?" she asked. Christine's lawyer stood, clearly scrambling. "Your Honor, this recording was made without my client's knowledge or consent by a child who may have been influenced by his father. We question both its authenticity and the circumstances under which it was obtained." Judge Martinez's expression hardened. "Arizona is a one-party consent state, Counselor. The child who made this recording was party to the conversation and had every right to record it. As for authenticity, I can have it analyzed, but it certainly sounds genuine to me. Would your client like to claim it's been fabricated?" The lawyer glanced at Christine, who shook her head slightly, trapped. "No, Your Honor," the lawyer said quietly. The judge turned her attention to Christine directly. "Ms. Morgan, I want you to understand something. This court's primary concern is the welfare of these children. What I heard on that recording is not a mother protecting her children. It's a mother actively working to damage their relationship with their father for what appears to be personal reasons. Can you explain to me why you told your daughter that her father said having children ruined his career?" Christine's voice was defensive when she finally spoke. "I was upset, Your Honor. James and I had a difficult marriage, and sometimes emotions run high. I never meant to hurt Emma. I was just trying to help her understand why the divorce happened." Judge Martinez's eyebrows rose. "By lying to her?" By telling her that her father doesn't love her? That's your idea of helping a 7-year-old understand a complex situation? Christine faltered, looking to her lawyer for support that didn't come. I made a mistake. I was angry. The judge leaned forward. One mistake I could understand, Ms. Morgan. But Mr. Chen has submitted a timeline of behavior spanning 6 months. Missed calls from Mr. Morgan that you ignored. Schedule changes that limited his time with the children. Social media posts that exclude him entirely while promoting your new partner as the children's father figure. This is a pattern, not a mistake. The hearing lasted another 2 hours, with both sides presenting arguments and counter-arguments. Patricia brought up the rapid introduction of Derek into the children's lives, the financial manipulation designed to make me look inadequate, the systematic effort to erase me from my own children's daily existence. Christine's lawyer tried to paint me as an absent workaholic who was now suddenly interested in parenting only because his pride had been hurt. But every argument they made fell flat against the evidence we'd presented. Finally, Judge Martinez called for a recess to review everything in her chambers. Patricia and I sat in the hallway, not speaking, both of us knowing that the next hour would determine the entire future of my relationship with Marcus and Emma. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Martinez's expression was grave. "I've made my decision," she said. "First, I'm ordering an immediate custody evaluation by a court-appointed psychologist. Second, I'm modifying the temporary custody arrangement effective immediately. Mr. Morgan will have the children for equal time, alternating weeks, until the evaluation is complete and a final custody determination can be made. Third, both parents are hereby ordered to attend co-parenting classes and to refrain from any negative comments about the other parent in the presence of the children." She looked directly at Christine. "Ms. Morgan, if I hear even a whisper of further parental alienation, I will seriously consider awarding primary custody to Mr. Morgan. Do you understand me?" Christine's face was ashen. She nodded. The judge continued. "Children need both parents when possible, and this court will not allow one parent to poison a child's relationship with the other. Mr. Morgan has demonstrated that he is a dedicated father who has been systematically excluded from his children's lives through manipulation and deceit. That ends today." The gavel came down, and just like that, everything changed. I would have my children for half of every month. Real time, not stolen Wednesday evenings and every other weekend scraps. Patricia squeezed my shoulder as we stood, and I had to blink back tears of relief and vindication. Outside the courtroom, Christine tried to approach me, but Derek pulled her away, whispering urgently in her ear. They left through a side exit while I stood in the main hallway, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Mom just called and said we're staying with you next week. Is it true?" I typed back with shaking hands, "Yes. It's true. I'll pick you up Sunday evening." His response was immediate, "Finally." That Sunday, I pulled up to the house I used to call home at exactly 6 o'clock, the time specified in the new custody order. Christine opened the door before I could knock, her face tight with anger barely held in check. Marcus and Emma stood behind her, backpacks already on. "1 week, Christine said coldly. "And if they come back to me saying you've been talking badly about me, I'll make sure the judge hears about it." I met her eyes steadily. "I have never said a negative word about you to them, Christine. I never will. I wish you'd given me the same courtesy." She had no response to that. She turned to the kids, kissed them each on the forehead, and told them to be good. Then they were walking to my car, climbing in, and we were driving away. The first few days were an adjustment. My apartment was small, with only one bedroom that I'd been using while the kids slept on an air mattress in the living room during their visits. But now they'd be here for a full week at a time, and I needed to make it feel more like home. That first night, we ordered pizza and sat on the floor eating it straight from the box, talking about school and friends and everything we hadn't had time to discuss in our truncated visits. Emma asked if Christine was in trouble, and I chose my words carefully. "Your mom made some mistakes," I said. "We all make mistakes. But the important thing is that you both know, no matter what, your mom and I both love you. That will never change. Marcus looked at me with those two old eyes. She was lying though, wasn't she? About you not wanting us? I pulled him close, feeling his thin shoulders under my hands. She was lying. I have never, not for 1 second, wished you weren't in my life. You and Emma are the best things that ever happened to me. Every day I couldn't see you felt like missing a piece of myself. He nodded against my chest, and I felt some of the tension in his small body finally release. Emma crawled into my lap, something she hadn't done in months, and we sat there on the floor of my cramped apartment, the three of us together, and it felt like the first real breath I'd taken in half a year. The custody evaluation took 6 weeks. A psychologist named Dr. Reynolds met with each of us separately, then observed us with the children, then interviewed the kids alone. She visited both homes, spoke to teachers and neighbors, reviewed all the court documents and evidence. I was honest with her about everything, the struggles in my marriage, my work hours, the financial pressures, and my absolute commitment to my children. I didn't try to paint Christine as a monster. I simply told the truth, which was that she'd let her anger at me override what was best for Marcus and Emma. When Dr. Reynolds interviewed the children, Marcus apparently played her the recording without being asked, saying he wanted her to know what really happened. Emma, still young enough to have trouble articulating complex emotions, apparently drew pictures. In one, she'd drawn 3 houses, a big one with Christine and Derek, a small one with me, and in the middle, 2 small figures standing alone. That's me and Marcus, she'd told Dr. Reynolds. We don't know which house is home anymore. Dr. Reynolds' report was submitted to the court in October, just as the desert heat was finally breaking into something bearable. Patricia called me at work when she received it, her voice barely containing excitement. James, she's recommending equal custody with a 50-50 split. She noted strong bonds with both parents but serious concerns about Christine's past behavior. The judge is going to adopt this recommendation. I sat down at my desk, lightheaded with relief. Equal custody. My children, half the time, legitimately and legally. Not stolen hours or every other weekend scraps, but real, sustained time to be their father. The final custody hearing was scheduled for early November. By then, the children had been doing the week-on, week-off arrangement for 2 months, and the difference in them was remarkable. Marcus smiled more, shared his artwork again, started talking about wanting to be an engineer like me. Emma stopped asking why I couldn't come inside the house and instead talked about what we'd do during my week versus Mom's week, accepting the new reality with the resilience of childhood. They'd even started to accept Derek's presence, though Marcus told me privately that Derek's okay, but he's not my dad. You are. On the day of the final hearing, the courtroom felt less charged than the emergency session had been. Judge Martinez reviewed Dr. Reynolds' report, asked a few clarifying questions, and then announced her decision. Based on the evaluation and the evidence presented, this court awards joint legal custody to both parents with equal physical custody on a week-on, week-off schedule. Holidays will alternate annually. Both parents are to continue co-parenting classes and maintain respectful communication focused solely on the children's well-being. She looked at both of us. Marcus and Emma are fortunate to have 2 parents who love them. I expect both of you to remember that and to put their needs above your own feelings. This court is adjourned. Walking out of that courtroom with a custody order that gave me equal time with my children felt like emerging from a long, dark tunnel into sunlight. Christine left quickly, her lawyer pulling her toward the exit while Derek waited by their car. I stood in the hallway with Patricia, who shook my hand and said something I'll never forget. You did this the right way, James. You didn't retaliate or stoop to her level. You just documented the truth and trusted the system to work. That takes courage. I thought about Marcus, recording his mother's lies because he knew they were wrong. About Emma, leaving me a voicemail in the middle of the night because even at 7 years old, she needed to know if her father really loved her. About all the small moments of bravery it had taken to get to this point. The first full week after the final custody order felt like a new beginning. I picked up the kids on Sunday evening, and we drove back to my apartment, which I'd started calling our place instead of Dad's apartment. I'd bought a small table so we could eat dinner together properly. I'd hung their artwork on the walls. I'd made space in the closet for their clothes and cleared out a bookshelf for their things. It wasn't much, but it was ours. That night, Emma asked if she could call Christine to say goodnight, and I handed her the phone without hesitation. When she finished, I spoke briefly with Christine about Marcus's upcoming school project and Emma's doctor's appointment. It was civil, focused on the children, exactly what Judge Martinez had ordered. When I hung up, Marcus was watching me. "You're being nice to her," he observed. "Even after everything she said." I nodded. "Because being angry at your mom doesn't help you or Emma. And because no matter what happened between us, she's still your mother. You're allowed to love both of us." Over the following months, we settled into our new rhythm. Marcus and Emma thrived under the consistency of knowing exactly when they'd see each parent, no more surprise schedule changes or manipulation. Christine, chastened by the court's ruling, stopped the overt alienation, though I sometimes caught hints of it in things the kids mentioned. "Mom says Derek can teach me better than you can," or "Mom says your apartment is too small for us." But I didn't rise to the bait. I simply continued being present, consistent, and loving. I helped with homework, attended school events, coached Marcus's Little League team, and took Emma to her dance recitals. I made sure they knew, through actions more than words, that their father chose them every single day. The recording Marcus had made remained a watershed moment, not just legally but emotionally. He'd seen his mother lying and had the moral clarity to recognize it as wrong, even though it would have been easier to stay silent. That kind of integrity in a 9-year-old amazed me. One evening, months after the final custody hearing, Marcus and I were working on a model bridge together, and he asked out of nowhere, "Dad, why did Mom say those things about you?" I set down the piece I was holding and thought about how to answer. "Sometimes when people are hurting or angry, they say things they don't mean," I said carefully. "Your mom was upset about the divorce, and she handled it badly. But that doesn't make her a bad person. It just means she made bad choices." He considered this, then nodded. "I'm glad I recorded it," he said. "I'm glad the judge heard the truth." I pulled him into a hug. "Me too, son. Me too." Looking back on those 6 months of fighting for my children, I realize how close I came to losing them entirely. If Marcus hadn't been brave enough to document the truth, if Emma hadn't left that heartbreaking voicemail, if I hadn't had a lawyer willing to fight hard on my behalf, the outcome could have been very different. Family courts are slowly improving, becoming more aware of parental alienation and more willing to hold both mothers and fathers to the same standards. But for a long time, fathers were assumed to be secondary parents, weekend babysitters rather than true co-parents. That's changing, but it changes because people like me refuse to accept being erased from their children's lives. Christine and I will never be friends. The hurt runs too deep, the betrayal too fundamental. But we've learned to be functional co-parents, communicating through a shared calendar app and keeping our conversations focused solely on logistics and the children's needs. Derek remains in the picture, and I've made peace with that. He's not a bad person, just someone who got caught up in Christine's narrative and her financial calculations. The kids have adjusted to having multiple parental figures in their lives, and that's okay. What matters is that they know, without question, that their father fought for them and will always fight for them. Emma is 10 now, Marcus 12, and they're growing into remarkable young people. Emma wants to be a veterinarian and fills our weeks together with stories about the animals she's learned about in school. Marcus is building his own engineering projects, designing structures that sometimes actually stand up, much to both our amazement. The months following the custody ruling brought a rhythm I hadn't known was possible. Marcus and Emma spent alternating weeks with me, and during those weeks, my apartment transformed from a lonely bachelor pad into something resembling an actual home. I bought bunk beds for the second bedroom I'd been using as an office, painted the walls a warm blue that Emma chose, and hung Marcus's engineering drawings on the refrigerator like they were gallery pieces. We established routines, Pancakes on Sunday mornings, homework at the kitchen table after dinner, movie nights on Fridays where we'd argue good-naturedly about whether to watch animated adventures or nature documentaries. The kids flourished under the predictability, no longer caught in the crossfire of scheduling games or emotional manipulation. But something else was happening too, something I hadn't anticipated. The custody battle had consumed so much of my energy and focus that I'd neglected other aspects of my life entirely. My career had stagnated. While I'd been fighting for my children in court, younger engineers at my firm had been taking on the high-profile projects, building the relationships with clients that led to promotions and advancement. I was still doing solid work designing infrastructure systems, but I'd become invisible to upper management. My supervisor, Richard Chen, called me into his office one afternoon in late November and delivered the news with apologetic efficiency. The firm was restructuring. My position wasn't being eliminated exactly, but it was being redefined in ways that effectively meant a demotion and a pay cut. "You're a talented engineer, James," Richard said, not meeting my eyes. "But you've been distracted this year. We need people who can commit fully to their projects, who can travel when needed and put in the extra hours when deadlines approach. Given your custody situation, we don't think that's realistic for you anymore." I walked out of his office feeling gutted. The pay cut would strain my already tight finances. More than that, though, the implication stung deeply. I was being penalized for being a present father, for choosing my children over climbing the corporate ladder. The same dedication that had won me equal custody was now being used as justification to sideline my career. That night, after putting Marcus and Emma to bed, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by bills and bank statements, trying to figure out how to make the new numbers work. Child support calculations would be adjusted now that we had equal custody, which would help somewhat. But the rent on even this modest apartment, groceries for 3 people, the kids' activities and school expenses, it all added up to more than my reduced salary could comfortably cover. I thought about picking up freelance work, maybe taking on small residential design projects on the side. But that would mean less time with the kids during my custody weeks, which defeated the entire purpose of what I'd been fighting for. I was trapped in an impossible equation. I needed money to provide stability for my children, but earning that money required time I no longer had to spare. The stress kept me awake most of that night, staring at the ceiling and trying to see a path forward that didn't involve sacrifice piled upon sacrifice. The answer came from an unexpected source. My younger brother, Ethan, called me the following weekend while I was at the park with Marcus and Emma. Ethan had always been the entrepreneurial one in our family, the risk-taker who'd started 3 different businesses before he was 30. 2 had failed spectacularly, but the third, a software company that developed project management tools for construction firms, was thriving. "I heard about the demotion," Ethan said without preamble. "That's garbage, and you deserve better. Listen, I've got a proposition for you. My company needs someone who understands construction and engineering from the ground up, someone who can help us develop better tools for the people actually doing the work. The pay would be competitive, better than what you're making now even before the cut. And the best part? It's mostly remote work. You'd have flexibility to be there for the kids." I was skeptical at first. Ethan's enthusiasm often outpaced reality, and I'd learned to be cautious about his grand plans. But he sent me details that night, and the more I read, the more legitimate it seemed. His company, BuildSync, had secured significant venture capital funding and was expanding rapidly. They needed someone with my specific combination of engineering expertise and practical construction experience to serve as a technical consultant and help design their next generation of software tools. The position would pay nearly 30% more than my current salary, with stock options that could be worth substantial money if the company continued growing. And critically, I could work from home most days, going into their Phoenix office only twice a month for team meetings. I spent a week researching the company, reading reviews from employees, studying their financial reports and growth projections. Everything checked out. BuildSync was solving real problems in the construction industry, and they were doing it successfully. The risk was that startups could be volatile, subject to market shifts and funding changes in ways that established engineering firms weren't. But the potential reward, both financial and in terms of work-life balance, was too significant to ignore. I called Ethan back and told him I was interested. 3 interviews and 2 weeks later, I had an offer letter sitting on my kitchen table. I gave notice at my firm, endured Richard's surprise disappointment with quiet satisfaction, and started my new position on the first Monday of December. The difference was immediate and profound. Instead of commuting 45 minutes each way to an office where I'd become irrelevant, I walked 10 feet from my bedroom to my kitchen table, now converted into a functional workspace during the weeks the kids were with Christine. I collaborated with software developers and other engineers through video calls, reviewed construction documents and blueprints digitally, and provided expertise on everything from load calculations to workflow efficiency. The work was engaging and respected. My colleagues actually listened when I spoke, implementing suggestions and crediting my contributions. And when 3:30 rolled around on days when I had the kids, I simply closed my laptop, picked them up from school, and was fully present for the afternoon and evening. The financial improvement was equally transformative. My first paycheck from BuildSync was more than I'd seen in a single payment in years. I was able to move out of the cramped apartment into a small house with a yard, nothing fancy but enough space that Marcus and Emma could each have their own room. I bought a used truck that actually started reliably in the mornings. I could say yes when Emma asked if we could go out for ice cream or when Marcus needed new cleats for baseball. The constant low-level anxiety about money, the mental calculation that had accompanied every purchase for months, finally began to ease. But I was careful not to let the improved circumstances change who I was or what I'd learned. I remembered too clearly what Christine's obsession with wealth and status had done to our marriage and our family. I saved aggressively, invested in the kids' college funds, and lived well below my means. The house I bought was in a modest neighborhood where teachers and firefighters raised their families, not the upscale development where Christine and Derek had moved. I drove a practical vehicle, not a status symbol. When Marcus asked why we didn't have a pool like some of his friends, I explained that we were building security, not showing off. That sometimes the most important things were the ones nobody else could see. BuildSync's growth accelerated through the winter and into spring. The software we were developing turned out to be exactly what the construction industry needed, and major firms began adopting our tools. By March, Ethan told me confidentially that the company was preparing for an initial public offering within the next year. The stock options I'd been granted as part of my compensation package, which had seemed like a nice bonus but nothing life-changing, suddenly represented potential wealth that made my head spin. If the IPO went as projected, I might be looking at a windfall of several $100,000, maybe more. For the first time since the divorce, I started to imagine a future that included not just stability but genuine financial security. I didn't tell Christine about the job change or the improved finances. Our communication remained strictly focused on the children's schedules and needs, and there was no reason to provide information about my personal circumstances. As far as she knew, I was still working as an engineer at the same firm, still scraping by in a small apartment. It wasn't deception exactly, just privacy. I'd learned the hard way that Christine measured people by their bank accounts, and I had no interest in being evaluated by her anymore. What she thought of me was irrelevant. What mattered was being the father Marcus and Emma deserved. The kids were thriving in ways that made my heart ache with gratitude. Marcus joined the robotics club at school and discovered a passion for programming that complemented his engineering interests. He'd sit at the kitchen table with his laptop, teaching himself coding languages with the same focused intensity he brought to building model bridges. Emma found her voice in the school choir and began performing in small recitals, her confidence growing with each appearance. They both made new friends in our neighborhood, kids who'd ride their bikes over on sunny afternoons and stay for dinner, filling the house with noise and energy that had been absent for too long. One Saturday in April, Marcus asked if he could show me something on his tablet. He pulled up a video editing project he'd been working on, a short film about an engineer who builds a bridge connecting two communities that had been separated by a river. The animation was crude but heartfelt, and the message was clear: sometimes the most important building happens in the spaces between people. "It's kind of about you, Dad," Marcus said, shy but proud. About how you kept trying to build bridges to me and Emma even when Mom was making it hard. I watched the video 3 times, my throat tight with emotion, and told him it was the best thing anyone had ever made for me. Because it was. Through all of this, I'd been careful to maintain boundaries with Christine while remaining cooperative. We used a co-parenting app to manage schedules and share information about the kids, minimizing direct contact while ensuring nothing fell through the cracks. Occasionally she'd try to bait me into conflict, sending messages questioning my parenting decisions or implying that the kids weren't as happy at my house as they were at hers. I responded with polite firmness, never taking the bait, always redirecting the conversation back to practical matters. Judge Martinez's warning about parental alienation hung over all our interactions, and Christine seemed aware that any misstep could result in another court appearance she couldn't afford to lose. Derek had faded somewhat from the picture, or at least from the kids' stories about their time with Christine. They mentioned him less frequently, and when they did, it was in passing rather than with the forced enthusiasm Christine had initially tried to cultivate. I gathered that the relationship between Christine and Derek had cooled as the reality of blended family life proved more complicated than the Instagram version Christine had envisioned. Emma mentioned once that Derek traveled a lot for work now, and Marcus said offhandedly that Mom and Derek argue more lately. I didn't press for details. Their relationship was none of my business as long as the kids were safe and cared for. In May, BuildSync announced its IPO date, September 15th. The news sent ripples of excitement and anxiety through the company. Employees who'd been granted stock options suddenly faced the reality of potential windfalls or disappointments depending on how the market valued us. Ethan called me the night of the announcement, his voice electric with nervous energy. "This is it, James. Everything we've been building for 3 years comes down to how investors respond. If it goes well, you're looking at enough money to change your life. Real money, generational wealth kind of money." I thanked him for the opportunity he'd given me, reminded him that I'd joined the company for the work and the flexibility first, and tried not to let myself hope too much. But hope is a stubborn thing. That night, after Marcus and Emma were asleep, I sat in my small backyard and let myself imagine what genuine financial security might mean. No more anxiety about unexpected expenses or medical bills. College funds fully covered with money to spare. The ability to take the kids on real vacations, to create memories beyond our modest weekend adventures. Maybe even the chance to start a foundation or scholarship fund, helping other single fathers who were fighting the same battles I'd fought. The possibilities felt overwhelming and slightly dangerous, like standing at the edge of something vast that I might either fly across or fall into. The summer passed in a blur of preparation for the IPO and quality time with the kids. We took a camping trip to Sedona, sleeping in a borrowed tent and hiking through red rock canyons that made Emma gasp with wonder. Marcus caught his first fish, a tiny thing he immediately released with careful hands, talking about it for weeks afterward. We visited science museums and baseball games and ice cream shops, building the kind of simple, joyful memories that don't require wealth but are priceless nonetheless. Christine had the kids for their birthday weeks that year, and I sent them off with carefully chosen gifts and cards that told them how proud I was of who they were becoming. When they returned, Emma mentioned that Christine had seemed stressed lately, distracted and short-tempered in ways that reminded Emma of the months before the divorce. Marcus confirmed it, saying that Christine and Derek had been fighting more openly, that money seemed to be an issue despite Derek's apparent wealth. I filed the information away without comment, neither pleased nor concerned. Christine's life was her own to manage. My focus remained on providing stability and love during the time I had with my children. The IPO date arrived with the intensity of a storm front moving in. I'd taken the day off from client work, unable to focus on anything except watching the market open and seeing where BuildSync stock would land. Ethan had warned me that initial pricing could be volatile, that the first few hours of trading would determine whether the company's valuation held or collapsed. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, refreshing the stock ticker every few seconds like it might change the outcome. When the opening bell rang and trading began, BuildSync's stock price immediately jumped 15% above the IPO price. Then 20%. By lunch, it had stabilized at 28% above initial valuation, and the business news sites were calling us one of the most successful tech IPOs of the year. I did the math 3 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. The stock options I'd been granted, which had cost me nothing but represented ownership in the company, were suddenly worth $470,000. Nearly $500,000, created not through inheritance or luck but through my own work, my own expertise, my own decision to take a risk when my previous employer had written me off. I closed my laptop and sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. Financial security wasn't approaching anymore. It had arrived, sudden and undeniable, changing the landscape of possibility for me and my children. Ethan called that evening, whooping with joy. "We did it, brother. We actually did it. You're rich. I'm rich. Everyone who believed in this company when it was just an idea in my garage is rich." I laughed with him, caught up in his infectious excitement, but also feeling something more complex. Gratitude, certainly, but also a strange melancholy. I thought about the man I'd been 2 years ago, broken, fighting for scraps of time with his children while his ex-wife mocked his poverty. That man would have given anything for the security I now possessed. But becoming that man had required so much pain, so many losses, that I couldn't celebrate without also acknowledging the cost. The first thing I did with the money, after taxes and financial planning, was establish trust funds for Marcus and Emma. Enough to cover college, graduate school if they wanted it, and a solid foundation for their adult lives. The second thing was to buy the house we were renting, converting it from a temporary shelter into permanent home. The third thing was to call my lawyer, Patricia, and ask her about setting up a foundation to provide legal support for fathers fighting custody battles they couldn't afford. She connected me with specialists who helped me structure it properly, and by October, the Morgan Family Advocacy Fund was operational, quietly funding legal representation for men who were being systematically separated from their children. I didn't announce any of this publicly. There were no press releases or social media posts about my newfound wealth. To my neighbors, to Marcus and Emma's teachers, to everyone except my financial advisors and Ethan, I remained exactly who I'd always been, a single father working from home, raising his kids, living a modest life in a middle-class neighborhood. I still drove the same used truck, still wore jeans and t-shirts, still cooked dinner most nights rather than going out. The money existed as security and opportunity, not as identity. Christine remained unaware of the change in my circumstances. Our interactions continued through the co-parenting app, focused entirely on logistics. She didn't know about my new job, the IPO, or the foundation I'd established. Why would she? I owed her no explanations about my life, just as she owed me none about hers. We were co-parents, not partners, connected only by our shared responsibility to Marcus and Emma. That distance, once painful, had become protective. I no longer cared whether she approved of my choices or respected my accomplishments. Her opinion had become irrelevant the moment she chose to lie to our children about their father's love. The foundation's first case involved a father in Tucson who'd been granted only supervised visitation with his daughter based on accusations his ex-wife later admitted were fabricated. With proper legal representation funded by the Morgan Family Advocacy Fund, he was able to challenge the arrangement and ultimately win joint custody. Patricia sent me updates on each case we funded, and reading them reminded me why the fight had been worth it. Every father who got to be present in his child's life, every kid who didn't have to wonder if their dad really loved them, it mattered. It mattered more than money or status or any of the things Christine had valued above our family. Marcus turned 13 that fall, a milestone that arrived with startling speed. My little boy was becoming a young man, his voice deepening, his interests shifting toward things I sometimes struggled to understand. But our foundation remained solid. He still sought my advice on projects, still wanted to build things together, still trusted me with his thoughts and fears. Emma, at 11, was finding her own path, more social than her brother, more interested in creative arts than engineering. She'd started writing stories, elaborate fantasy tales that she'd read aloud to me in the evenings, her voice animated and confident. I listened to every word, marveling at the imagination that could create entire worlds from nothing but determination and hope. The year anniversary of the final custody ruling came and went without fanfare. I marked it privately, thinking about the man I'd been that day in court and the man I'd become. Stronger, certainly. More cautious about trust. More aware of how fragile stability could be and how quickly someone you loved could become someone you barely recognized. But also more grateful for the simple things, a child's laughter, a quiet morning, the knowledge that you'd fought for something that mattered and won. By winter, BuildSync's stock had continued climbing, and my net worth had crossed into territory that once would have seemed fantastical. I could have upgraded to a mansion, bought luxury cars, taken the kids on elaborate vacations to Europe or the Caribbean. Instead, I invested conservatively, expanded the foundation's reach, and maintained the life we'd built together. Because I'd learned something Christine never understood: wealth that demands to be seen isn't wealth at all. It's insecurity wearing expensive clothes. True security is knowing you could lose everything tomorrow and still be exactly who you are, still be loved by the people who matter. Christine's life, meanwhile, seemed to be following a different trajectory, though I only knew this through fragments the kids occasionally mentioned. Derek had apparently taken a financial hit in a real estate deal that went south. The lakeside cabin they'd visited so often was sold. Christine had gone back to work full-time, something she'd resented doing during our marriage. The tension in her household was palpable enough that even Emma, young as she was, noticed and mentioned it to me. "Mom seems sad a lot," she said one evening while we were making dinner together. "She says things are complicated right now." I asked if Christine was okay, if the kids felt safe and cared for. Emma nodded. "She's not mean or anything. Just tired and kind of quiet." I filed that away, neither gloating nor concerned, simply aware that life had continued for all of us in different directions. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have anticipated, was that Christine's awareness of my changed circumstances was approaching rapidly. That the carefully maintained privacy I'd built around my success was about to shatter in ways that would force another confrontation, another reckoning with the past we'd both been trying to escape. The revelation came on a Thursday afternoon in February, almost 2 years after the custody battle had ended. I was working from home, reviewing construction blueprints on my laptop while waiting for Marcus and Emma to finish their after-school activities. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message contained a single link to a local business journal article with the headline, "BuildSync Engineers Strike Gold, Local Tech IPO Creates Dozens of Millionaires." My stomach dropped as I clicked through and saw my name listed among the company's early employees who'd benefited from the stock offering. The article included approximate valuations, and while the numbers weren't exact, they were close enough to paint a clear picture. My privacy had just evaporated. Within an hour, my phone started ringing. Old colleagues from my previous firm, distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, even a few reporters asking for comments about my success story. I ignored most of them, but I couldn't ignore the call that came that evening from Christine. Her voice was tight with barely controlled emotion when I answered. "We need to talk about the children's financial arrangements," she said, skipping any pretense of pleasantries. "I just learned some very interesting information about your current circumstances, and I think it's time we revisited the custody agreement." I felt my jaw tighten. The custody agreement is final and working well for everyone involved. There's nothing to revisit. Her laugh was bitter. "You've been hiding money while I struggle to keep up with expenses. That's going to look very bad to a judge, James. Very bad indeed." I kept my voice level, refusing to be baited. "I haven't hidden anything. My financial situation improved after the custody ruling, which is completely legal and none of your concern. The kids are well cared for during my time, which is all that matters." She was quiet for a moment, then her tone shifted to something more calculating. "Marcus mentioned you're looking at private schools for next year. That's a significant expense. I think we should discuss how we're going to handle these decisions together, as partners in their upbringing." The word partners coming from her mouth would have been laughable if it weren't so transparently manipulative. "Any decisions about the children's education will be made jointly, as required by our custody agreement. but my ability to pay for certain things doesn't change our legal arrangement or give you access to my finances." The conversation ended with thinly veiled threats about returning to court, about arguing that changed financial circumstances warranted modified custody terms. I hung up knowing this wasn't over, that Christine had found a new angle to exploit. But I also knew something she apparently didn't. The recording of her lies to our children still existed, the court's warnings about parental alienation still stood, and no judge would look kindly on a parent trying to manipulate custody arrangements for financial gain rather than the children's actual welfare. 2 weeks later, Christine filed a motion to modify the custody agreement, claiming that my newly discovered wealth created an unstable environment for the children and that they should spend more time in her consistent, grounded household. Her lawyer argued that sudden affluence could be just as damaging as poverty, that the children needed protection from potential spoiling and unrealistic expectations about money. It was creative, I'd give her that, but it was also obviously motivated by her own financial struggles rather than genuine concern for Marcus and Emma. Patricia reviewed the filing with barely concealed irritation. "This is a fishing expedition," she said. "She's hoping to either get more custody time, which would reduce her child support obligations and increase yours, or she's positioning for some kind of financial settlement outside of court. Either way, the judge isn't going to be sympathetic. You've been the model of responsible parenting since the original ruling, and your financial improvement doesn't change that." The hearing was scheduled for early March, and I spent the intervening weeks documenting everything: the kids' grades, attendance records, their involvement in activities, photos of our time together, statements from their teachers about their well-being and adjustment. I wasn't going to let Christine's greed undo what we'd fought so hard to build. The courtroom was familiar now, the same space where Judge Martinez had ruled in my favor 2 years earlier. Christine sat with her lawyer, Derek noticeably absent this time. She looked tired, older somehow, the polished confidence she'd worn like armor during our divorce replaced by something harder and more desperate. When the hearing began, her lawyer presented their case. James Morgan had concealed significant wealth during the original custody proceedings, had misrepresented his financial situation, and was now using money to buy the children's affection through private schools and expensive activities. It was inflammatory and mostly false, but it was designed to plant doubt. Patricia dismantled the argument methodically. She presented the timeline showing that my financial improvement came entirely after the custody ruling, that I'd disclosed my new employment as required, and that every penny spent on the children had been documented and appropriate. She brought up Christine's pattern of using the children as leverage, the recording that had proven her willingness to lie and manipulate, and Judge Martinez's explicit warnings about further misconduct. Then she played her final card, asking the judge to review Christine's own social media posts from the past year, which showed continued attempts to paint herself as the superior parent while subtly undermining my relationship with Marcus and Emma. Judge Martinez listened to everything with an expression of increasing displeasure. When both sides had finished, she addressed Christine directly. "Ms. Morgan, you stood in this courtroom 2 years ago and heard me warn you about parental alienation. I made it clear that any further attempts to damage your children's relationship with their father would result in serious consequences. Yet here you are again, using the children as pawns in what appears to be a financial dispute rather than a genuine concern for their welfare." Christine started to respond, but the judge held up her hand. "I've reviewed all the evidence, including your ex-husband's financial records, his expenditures on the children, and their academic and social progress. What I see is a father who came into money and used it responsibly to enhance his children's lives and secure their futures. What I don't see is any valid reason to modify a custody arrangement that is clearly working well." The ruling came swift and final. The custody agreement would remain unchanged. Christine's motion was denied with prejudice, meaning she couldn't bring the same claims again without new evidence. And Judge Martinez added one more element: mandatory mediation before either parent could file any future custody modifications, forcing us to attempt resolution outside of court. Christine left the courthouse without speaking to me, her lawyer's hand on her elbow as they disappeared into the parking garage. I stood in the hallway with Patricia, feeling relief mixed with sadness. This should have been over years ago, but Christine's inability to let go of her resentment and financial obsession kept dragging us back into conflict. That evening, when I picked up Marcus and Emma for my week, they seemed lighter somehow, as if they'd sensed the tension and felt it finally release. We drove home talking about ordinary things, homework and weekend plans and what to make for dinner. Neither of them asked about court or their mother's latest attempt to change our arrangement. They simply settled into the rhythm we'd established, secure in the knowledge that this was their home too, that their father had fought for them and would keep fighting as long as necessary. As we pulled into the driveway of our modest house, Emma said something that made my throat tight. "I'm glad we live here, Dad. It feels safe." The foundation I'd established continued growing, helping fathers across Arizona fight custody battles they couldn't afford on their own. Each case reminded me of my own struggle, the desperation of loving your children while watching them be systematically turned against you. By the end of that year, we'd funded legal representation for 43 fathers, winning joint or primary custody in 31 cases. The statistics weren't just numbers to me. They were families restored, children who wouldn't grow up believing one parent had abandoned them, men who got to be the fathers they'd always wanted to be. Marcus graduated middle school that spring with honors, his robotics team taking second place in the state championship. Emma's choir performed at the state capitol, her voice clear and confident as she sang a solo that made half the audience reach for tissues. I sat in the crowd at both events, phone recording every moment, heart full of a pride that money could never buy. These were the victories that mattered, the measurements of success that Christine had never understood. Not bank accounts or property values, but the sound of your child's laughter, the trust in their eyes, the knowledge that you'd kept your promises even when everything seemed impossible. Christine's life continued parallel to ours, occasionally intersecting at school events or custody exchanges but mostly separate. Derek had apparently moved on, and she was dating someone new, a detail I learned only because Emma mentioned him once in passing. I hoped, genuinely, that Christine would find whatever she was searching for, that she'd eventually understand what she'd sacrificed in her pursuit of wealth and status. But whether she did or didn't was no longer my concern. My job was to raise our children with integrity, to show them through example what truly mattered, and to build a life defined not by what I possessed but by who I chose to be. Years from now, when Marcus and Emma are grown and telling their own children about their childhood, I hope they'll remember not the custody battles or the conflict, but the steady presence of a father who chose them above everything else. Who documented truth when faced with lies, who fought in courtrooms and won in living rooms, who learned that real wealth isn't measured in stock portfolios but in the unshakable bond between parent and child. That's the inheritance I want to leave them, the only one that truly matters. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.